Okay.
Hello, this is Anna Pacheco, SantaFe101.com. My guest today is Patrick O'Brien. He is a contractor with the company, the Salamander Company. Patrick, is it all right to record this interview?
It is, yes.
Oh, good. So tell me how you ended up in Taos, the interesting types of homes you build up there, but first and foremost, why is your company called the Salamander Company?
Yeah, that's a common question. And after all these years, I still don't have a very cohesive answer. I'm originally from Michigan in the Detroit area. And many years ago, back in the late 80s, a friend of mine and I decided to start a small deck building company there. And we were sitting around my apartment one evening trying to figure out what to call ourselves. And out of that, this name came. And we decided we both liked it because it just was a little strange. It had nothing to do with what we were trying to do. And we both liked that. And it just stuck. So that's the origin. And then and I continue to like the fact that it has nothing to do with what we do.
And then did your friend stay in Michigan but let you use the name out here in New Mexico, or what happened with that?
Okay. Yeah. Well, back then I got a salamander tattooed on my arm, so I got to keep the name.
Oh, okay, I like that. So tell me, I know you were, before I hit the record button, you were saying that this is the busiest you've ever been. Let's start with that. What's going on? Why are you so busy? Which is good.
It's real good. I can only put it to the fact that people are realizing that they can work from home now and can kind of live just about anywhere they like. I think that, and the fact that money is very inexpensive right now to borrow, if you're able to borrow money at all. Its rates are very low. I think that combined with just some unknown factors have just made it the busiest time. And that's from all my other builder friends are equally busy. I just bumped into an architect in town who's a friend of mine at the post office, and they're booked up for years, and we are too at this point.
So tell me, I was referred to you by Maria, a realtor up in Taos, and she said that you're a very interesting type of contractor. So tell me about the type of construction and the type of work that you do that makes you so popular out in Taos County.
And the way we defined that was we started honing in on straw bale houses, and really kind of became enamored with that whole technology. And over the years, developed ways of putting together a straw bale house, which kind of took it out of the owner builder kind of hippie kind of do it yourself kind of home to a high-end, professionally built, professionally finished home for real people with real money. And we did that for a number of years, really, until the housing collapse of like 2008 and 9, when things really kind of stopped here. And then when it started back up again, the interest in straw bales seemed to just kind of go away. But since then, we've not developed ourselves, but we've followed the trends and followed the building sciences to start utilizing more modern materials that yield the same kind of efficiencies and results that a straw bale house can give you in terms of performance. And that's what we're focusing in on now.
And so what would some of those materials be?
It's just a higher grade, different levels of insulation and air barriers. So the idea now is to make a house that's almost airtight, so that the energy needed to heat or cool the home is very, very little, because whatever happens in there just stays in the house. And then there's air recirculation systems and things like that keep the air fresh and keep everything working well. So the construction methods on the new technologies aren't complicated. It's just a specific knowledge of where to do what and when. And if you do it that way, it doesn't necessarily add to the cost of the building, as long as the crew is trained and knows procedurally when to apply these techniques through the building process. And what you end up with is a very, very efficient house with not a whole lot of extra fancy technology or a whole lot of extra cost involved.
Well, let me ask you, so would you still start out, would it still be like a wooden frame house? Would you use
Yeah,
drywall?
yeah, it's still 2x6 frame. So it's very conventional building materials. It's 2x6 frame construction with sheetrock finishes on the inside, which can then either be plastered or painted, depending on the budget and the desire. And then the outside of the house again can be the traditional sort of cement stucco that we have up here, or really any kind of exterior siding is appropriate for these technologies. So they lend themselves good to just about any kind of finishes you like. So if somebody wanted to build, a kind of a traditional looking Adobe style house that they've been doing forever up here with frame construction, you can still achieve that look, but just have that house function much, much more efficiently than a house built, say, 10 years ago might.
But what are some of the technologies? So what makes it airtight? Do you have like some kind of
It's
plastic?
it starts at the foundation. It's a heavily insulated foundation, for one, more so than a standard insulation. And for that, use a lot of rigid insulation applied in the right spots. And then from the ground all the way up through the walls to the ceiling, the whole house has an air barrier. It's called. It's like a vapor barrier. It's a sheet. It's a woven polyethylene sheet. It's different materials that will allow water vapor to pass through, but stops air transmission, so you don't get drafts. I think everybody has the experience of putting their hand on a light switch on a cold winter's night and feeling cold air coming in from behind that light switch. Um, and a house that, like what I'm talking about, eliminates all of those little air intrusions from the outside to the inside and vice versa. So you don't get all these little leaks throughout the house. So as you put the air barrier up, all the seams are taped, all the connections are caulked. So it's very, very airtight, and it's very meticulous all the way through the house.
And what type of a heating system do those types of houses have?
Those can have a standard heat system, radiant floor with a boiler. You can do that. But one of the good things about this is one of the ways that you can save on keep the costs down is you can use a mini split heat system, or like a heat pump heat system, which is electrical in nature, and it heats in a much more efficient way. And so you don't necessarily have to have a big mechanical room with a big boiler in it and a big hot water heater and all the accompanying technologies that go with that, which can be very, very costly. All you have are very small, almost individual room heaters that heat the space. And because it's so insulated, that heat stays in the space and makes it very, very comfortable. So your heat costs go down, and the cost of the heating system goes way, way down in terms of new building.
Now, and they used to say that for an authentic Adobe home, they stay cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Would that be the same, a similar concept with the technology that you're
Yeah,
using now?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, whatever you introduce to the inside of the house, whether it's heat or cool, is going to hold itself. So here in northern New Mexico, um, the need for air conditioning is not. We don't typically use air conditioning in our houses. Um, Usually, people will open up their windows at night and maybe have a couple of ceiling fans. And because the nights get so cool, and even in the dead of summer, in the morning you can close the house up and shut the blinds so the sun doesn't come in, and that cool night air will stay in the house and keep the house a cool temperature all day long. And if you want to introduce some of these mini split heat pump systems, have a cooling agent as well, so you can actually set the thermostat to keep it at 65 or 66 degrees or something like that, and that will actually mechanically cool the house too, if you decided to go that direction. But in my experience, mechanical cooling techniques aren't really necessary here. If you have a well-designed house that has good cross ventilation with ceiling fans, and you can let the cool night air in, then you can keep that air in during the day.
And tell our, excuse me, tell our listeners a little bit about flat roofs. As we speak, I just signed a contract to get a new roof on my flat roofed house. Tell me a little bit about, do you specialize in doing flat roofs? Do you have what's your opinion on that?
I think a flat roofed house on an old Adobe tucked into a grove of aspens is one of the most charming things you can see, but we've invented better things. um, there's still a lot of flat roof buildings being built today. We've built some. But if I have anything to say about it, I prefer a pitched roof because they work better. They work better. They work better longer. They're easier to catch water off of if you want to do rainwater catchment, which is something that we do try to do. And I think people will be doing more down the line. I think aesthetically, I like the look of a pitched roof house myself, but just practically and functionally, they're easier to insulate, they're easier to ventilate, they're easier to guarantee a leak-free roof for longer. They're less expensive to build to begin with. So there's a lot of options. There's a lot of good points to kind of going away from the traditional architecture of a flat roof. I mean, they started with flat roofs here years, obviously, centuries ago, because you could go up into the mountains and cut down big logs and stack them on these mud brick buildings that you've built, and that was your roof. But they used dirt insulation and all that kind of stuff. We've obviously made advancements in our technology, it's in our building materials, so that's not necessarily something that you have to do. And people who live here and also people who come from other areas and love it here are enamored with the romance of big vigas and the parapets and all that stuff. And it's a beautiful, charming look, but there are drawbacks to it.
Exactly. Well, I mean, roofers do really well in this part of the country.
Yeah, the roofers like them.
So your houses look, I mean, they have that Adobe look, but it's kind of like the northern New Mexico. You see them a lot going up to like Chimayo and that area where they have the pitch roof, but they're Adobe looking houses, but they have the really cool, like sometimes blue pitch roofs or like that. Those,
and basically that falls under two general styles. The parapets and the flat roofed house is referred to as a Pueblo style, and obviously the pitched roof, like up in Trampas and Penasco and those areas, are more territorial style, and that refers to having a pitched metal roof on an adobe wall, so you get the same.
If somebody was looking at maybe, how would they know, like, what's the name, or how do you market the type of houses you make now? So somebody would say, well, I definitely want an Adobe house, or I want a straw bale house. But what would they say about, I definitely want this type of a home? How do they know about how do they know that this is like the latest, greatest thing, or the most practical thing?
The general category of the house that I described to you is referred to as a passive house. And that's a technology that's come out of Germany primarily, but Europe, basically. And it's relatively new in the States, but they've been doing it in Germany for the last 30, 40 years. So it's not a new technology there at all. So the passive house it comes from the notion that the house does not require a lot of outside intervention for it to function. So it's a more passive building. It doesn't require great, enormous amounts of energy input for it to stay warm. So that's where the term passive comes from. So the passive house movement refers to this very tightly built, highly insulative house that's very efficient. And another term you might hear it described as is a net zero house. And that refers to the amount of energy use that house might need. If you outfit a house with solar panels, you might be creating more energy than the house actually needs to use to function. So your energy consumption is net zero because you're creating energy more than you're using it. So the net zero passive house is kind of those are the two terms that are sort of used to describe that.
And I guess that would fall under the category of green building?
Certainly. Green building, sustainable building, right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what got you interested in this type of construction?
It's just been an evolution. Like I said, we started off doing straw bale because I just was enamored with that. We first built a little straw bale house for my wife and son and I on the Mesa west of the Gorge Bridge out here, back in the early 90s. And just basically homesteaded out there. They had no power, had no water. We had solar energy and roof catchment water, and we were only in Taos for 2 years. I'd never touched a straw bale in my life. I grew up in Detroit. So all of a sudden I'm building a house by stacking these big, huge blocks of straw bale and kind of just trying to figure it out as I went. And from there, started reading more and learning more, much by trial and error. And then that just was an evolutionary process. I've always been interested in using natural materials as much as possible and making a house be as energy efficient as we can make it, but also make it aesthetically pleasing and comfortable and lovely to be in. Because I think that's just as important as anything else.
And what
Being
would
able-
be the difference, like the, traditional adobe, a mud brick versus the straw bale? What are the differences, or are they very similar?
No, they're very dissimilar. Basically, a straw bale is all insulation. It's nothing but insulation. It will not hold any energy in it at all. Whereas an adobe brick is almost no insulation, and it's all thermal mass. So the adobe brick will heat up in the sun, and then hours later you put your hand on it, it's still warm from the sun. So the idea of using adobe as thermal mass is that you can heat it up, and then as the heat transfers through the brick, it releases heat to the inside of the house. An adobe, or I mean a straw bale, you can leave a straw bale out in the hot sun all day long, and it doesn't, its internal temperature does not change. It doesn't absorb and store any heat. But if you have a hot adobe brick inside your house releasing its energy, and it's surrounded by straw bales, the energy that that adobe brick is going to release is going to stay inside that building because of the straw bales, because of the insulation. So the two combined, I think, is a brilliant way to build.
And then, and also adobe has straw in it, right? The actual.
Yeah, and the straw in the adobe is a binder just to kind of hold it together. It kind of forms a matrix that kind of holds it all together, so it doesn't just kind of break off and crumble. And then because the old style, the term you used earlier, warm in the winter, cool in the summer for the adobe. The old style adobes that they used to build here were double wall adobes. They were 2 layers of adobe brick with an airspace between them, which is why you'd get these very, very thick walls. And those worked great, but they were very labor intensive to build. And then when people started charging, they got very costly to build.
Exactly. So do you, if somebody were to come to you and say, I want an adobe house, would you build that?
I would, but after a couple of good, frank conversations with them, I would. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And then what about straw bale? What if somebody said to you, I still love the idea of a straw bale house.
I would love to. I would love to. Yeah.
We'll do that. And so what would the cost, what the new technology that you do now, what's it called? Passive? Is that the word?
Passive house. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The passive house. What would be the median cost of, say, a 2,000 square foot home? And that's probably even small, but I'm thinking, what would like an average cost of if you were to build a house?
Well, that's the big question, because this past year has changed the pricing structure dramatically.
Because of lumber, right? Everybody says lumber has just skyrocketed.
Price increases on everything, every kind of building material, basically. Yeah. It's anywhere from 30 to 70% increases in cost, depending on what you're talking about, and it's been all over the place. So I'm telling people now that to do a custom build of any size, you have to be kind of in the $280 to $300 a square foot price range.
So 280 to 300. Okay.
Yeah. And that's a good jumping off point. I mean, it can go up from there depending on the design and site conditions and all the other.
Yeah, how fancy you want it.
Exactly. Yeah, but if you're coming to a builder now thinking that you're going to build something for $220 a square foot, you're just not going to make it. You're not going to do it. So that's why I say that's a good. What I tell my potential clients is, like, if these numbers don't scare you away, then we can keep talking. If these are way beyond your ability to pay, then you need to reconsider your plans, because you might find a builder who can say he can do it for less. He either doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's not being completely honest with you, because he can't.
Okay. And then what would the cost of a straw bale home, again, what would that cost, more or less?
A straw bale home, like an adobe home, really, the adobe and straw bale are the most expensive ways to build. Okay. Because of their, which is interesting, because they're both natural materials. One grows in a field, and the other, anybody can go out in their yard and make an adobe brick. So it's kind of counterintuitive to think that they'd be the most expensive, but they're very labor intensive.
Well, see, back in the Santa Fe is my hometown. So back in the day when I was a kid, I learned how to make adobes with my uncle. But so I know that's definitely labor intensive, but pardon my ignorance, I thought a straw bale, just some farmer or somebody would just create these bricks for you. I mean, they do, but it's labor intensive to build with them, because they're
They're labor intensive to cut and to resize for the house. And then all the mechanicals that need to go into them, electricians and plumbers, those costs are higher because you have to make special accommodations for them in the straw bales. And then the plastering of the straw bales, it takes a lot of plaster because they're so uneven and porous. You have to really put thick coats of stucco and plaster on both the inside and the outside. And that drives the cost quite a bit.
So what would the cost of an Adobe or straw bale home be, like 280 to 300 or higher than?
I would say it's probably about 20% higher. So I'd say probably, I'd probably put the starting cost of an Adobe or straw bale at probably 320,
Okay.
thereabouts.
But you're right. Isn't that funny that these natural materials, hay and mud bricks, they cost
Yeah.
more. I always tell people
But
that in Santa Fe, it's like poor man's housing. When in the old days, a man would make his own mud bricks. He'd build a room or two as his family grew. He'd add on. Today in Santa Fe, only the very rich can afford to live in mud
yeah.
huts.
Well, and you could still do that today, but that same man, and perhaps even, your uncle, perhaps, who was doing the bricks that you would help him make, they would have the family and the kids out there making bricks, and you see them out laying in the yard. And there's places in Taos, I remember seeing that, earlier on, and they'd
Well, there
make
used to
bricks
be a company up in Taos. I forget his name. There was
yeah,
a company that makes Adobes up there. I
yeah,
wonder if
yeah,
they still do.
yeah, and there still is. But the way that they used to do it before, like you say, the poor man's house, but it would take a family, it could take a family 2 or 3 seasons to make enough bricks to make a house. And then, so if you're doing it, if you've got lots and lots and lots and lots of time, you can still make an Adobe house that way. But when you start to compress the time and say, I want an Adobe house, but I need it in the next 8 months,
Well, that's the
then
other
you're
thing
going to
too, is
start
that
paying
people don't
premium.
live in small houses any longer. They want 25 to
Right.
3,000 square foot
Exactly.
house. I mean, that's a lot of Adobes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly right.
and then it's just more expensive because of, I mean, like you have to configure the Wi-Fi or the fiber optics to go through the mud wall. I mean, it's just way too expensive.
Yeah, yeah.
Used to be insane.
If you were a homesteader and wanted to keep it simple and wanted to build natural, you could still do it the old school way if you had that kind of time, and you could do it for dirt cheap. You could cut your own vigas in the forest. You could bake your own bricks. I mean, you could really do it. It would probably take you a couple of years, but you'd end up with a beautiful house. But
And if you knew
that's
what you were doing, and if you had a big family, that's the
yeah.
old fashioned way. But we're actually the interviews. We're at the end of the interview. So the way to go then, from what I've learned from this interview, is that a passive house is like the latest in green building, and that's probably the most economical. I mean, what would it be that would be one of the most economical in terms of green building right now? Is that what you would say?
I would say so. Yeah, the most economical and the most efficient. And I think economical kind of is a interesting way to look at it because there's upfront costs which are going to be higher. Like for instance, in a passive house, you need to have triple pane windows. That's going to be a lot more expensive than double pane windows. But you compare that with the less expensive heat system that you have to have, and then just the comfort level that you're going to experience right away. So there's upfront costs that are going to be a little bit higher, but then very quickly those costs begin to be offset by just the comfort and the efficiency of the place for the rest of the life of the building, basically.
So yeah, so if you're thinking about that type of construction, you have to think of it in the long term, not just
Precisely.
right
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. The
So
paybacks aren't necessarily immediate.
right. And so what is your time frame? If somebody saw this interview, said, I'm calling up Patrick. I'm living in Taos. He's going to be my contractor. What is, like, just based on where we are right now, we're coming to hopefully the end of COVID, springtime 2021. Like, what if somebody contacted you, they had a lot in Taos, they want to build, like, I mean, how far out do they have to contract you? Are you a year ahead? Would it be next year that you could work with them, or could you work with them relatively?
Well, right now we have a house sign. We have a project that'll take us through probably the winter of 2022. So I
Okay.
would say probably the springtime 2023, we're wide open.
Okay.
I could probably take on another project in the late summer of 22, I would think, but it's it's the project we've got for next year is a big one. So, and we just
So
signed
the
that.
thing is, if people want, they mean, just if they're thinking ahead, so they could just at least contact you now, because they've got to get on your book, you know, they've got to get.
Yeah, and really, it depends on where they are in the process. Because a lot of times we get people calling who haven't even bought their land yet. So, you know, picking and buying land, that's a whole process. Getting a design for the house, that can take many months, you know,
Right.
working out a design. And we do design build too, so I can do design work as well. But that buying land, settling on a design, working through the design, you know, all that could easily take a year right there.
Right.
So being a year and a half, you know, from being able to start building isn't, in some cases, isn't too hard to see happening. You know,
Right.
I've had to turn work away just yesterday. You know, this person had a really big project they wanted me to look at, but they want it done this next summer. And it's like, I just
Right.
can't
And so
do
are
it.
you the only company up in Taos County that does this type of construction?
No. There's a guy, a friend of mine up here, who I've learned a lot from, and he's pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, he kind of brought this technology into the Taos County area. And then he's more of a designer, but he does design work and stuff. But he's really studied this passive house stuff, and I've actually you know, had a couple of consultations with him just so he could teach me what I need to know. So,
Well, that's good to
and
know. There's other options if people are just
oh
dead set
yeah,
on a passive house in
and
Taos.
there's other builders, you know, Taos, like Santa Fe, there's a lot of builders around who are sort of flying, you know, they're legal and licensed, but they don't have a lot of advertisement, and they have one job at a time, and they're doing beautiful, great work. You know, it's just a matter of finding these guys.
Well, oftentimes referrals is the way to go for, you know, for
That's
your.
how it's always been. And that's really shifted a lot too. The word of mouth referral, it seems to be going away.
Well, they'll thank this darn internet that we're on right now. You know, I want to thank you again for your time. Anything else you want to close with?
No, I think this has been great. I'm excited about this.
Okay,
I'm glad
all
to
the
be part of
best
it.
to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
Patrick
Anna.
O'Brien, the Salamander Company. I like
That's right.
that. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Anna.